Good morning. Opening of day 2. Very happy to have the honor to do that. So I hope you had a nice time yesterday and I hope you had a good sleep. So it's a pleasure to welcome you back to day 2 of our conference. Yesterday, during our GSI President's opening speech, Dennis Snower, we were reminded that in a fractured world of, say, my nation first politics, smart, engaged, and also reinforced multilateralism is more necessary than ever. So aligning global cooperation with national interests isn't just possible. No, it's essential. And the task ahead is to turn shared global gains into tangible, also national benefits, of course. So when governments retreat from global cooperation, it falls short to other stakeholders and to global civil society. So we have to keep the agenda for a just future alive. And this is also where we hope that this meeting here today, these 2 days, could help a little bit and, say, reinforce our joint powers. So responsibility to imagine and advance better global models doesn't disappear, it just shifts. And it lands with those willing to act. And I hope that we create this community of those willing to act. And please just put it also outward of these interesting rooms to everywhere you go. So we heard a powerful call for a new kind of policy making, one that doesn't treat growth, solidarity, and environmental health as competing goals. Instead, it places them side by side as the foundation for inclusive and meaningful development. Agency, equity, long-term thinking must be the central to how we govern in this very decisive decade. I think we are really in front of something which will change the globe entirely, and we have to see that it goes on the good side and not on the bad side. So we know this famous Star Wars agenda. Let's not have a polarization like that. So, a recurring theme was the need for institutional innovation, therefore, and I think if we talk about institutional innovation, we as an organization which also tries to feed into the G20 and the G7 communities and also receive a lot from these communities, I think we really need this bold collaboration also to global inequality, which we still face in a lot of the global south and elsewhere. So the digital dialogue helped us move beyond the somewhat tiring EU versus US framing. So we explore and explored already to build digital systems that truly empower people, not just regulate platforms or chase innovation for its own sake. So we need a new consensus, and this is built on citizen-first, value-driven, and anchored in public interest, also digital infrastructure, where we presented here a very nice toolkit with our partners. So before we move into today's program, let me note that this is a particularly also special day for Germany. So the new Chancellor is sworn in, and of course we also have a look onto that because there is a lot of cooperation also between this organization and governmental organizations. So we have one ear what's happening now. So we mark therefore not only a shift in domestic leadership, but the beginning of a new chapter also in Germany's international engagement, and I think whatever it takes, one that will influence its role as a partner and also ally in shaping global cooperation. As we know, working together for quite 8 years. So, and now it's a great honor to introduce our next speaker, former President of Senegal, Macky Sall, and so that's for me, and now Claudia, please.
Please welcome to the stage His Excellency Macky Sall.
Thank you very much. Good morning, sehr Damen und Herren. I hope I salute in Germany. Mesdames et messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen,
chers amis,
dear friends, first of all, I'd like to thank our friend Christian Kastrop for his very kind invitation and for the warm welcome he extended to me. And I have to admit that I'm particularly happy to be here in Berlin this morning. Berlin is a historic city that has played an important role for ages already, but certainly in particular after the Second World War. If we speak about resilience, Germany is really a successful example for resilience, because 80 years ago this country was completely destroyed, and we saw and witnessed how work and dedication led to a transformation and has transformed this city from the rubbles to the first city in Europe. So I'd like to congratulate Global Solutions on organizing this summit. In a world beset by tensions and uncertainties, it is both timely and salutary to create spaces for dialogue, something that is really lacking nowadays in the world. Spaces for dialogue so that we can work together to find possible ways out of the crisis. And faced with these urgent challenges, the course of history is once again thrown into turmoil. The multilateral system, which born from the rubble of the war to promote peace, to share progress and foment solidarity between nations, this system today is showing its limits. It is struggling to provide concerted answers to contemporary challenges, and indeed, multilateral bodies seem to be at a standstill, frozen, while both old and new conflicts persist, some more disastrous than others. And terrorist threats remain unresolved across the globe. The successive COPs, we are now at the 29th, are succeeding each other, and that will take place, latest one will take place in Brazil. But yet, and despite all of that, global warming is worsening. And the world is now witnessing a major trade war, just as we were already struggling to recover from the last economic and financial crisis. And against this backdrop of crisis and profound change, Africa continues to face a number of challenges. Yes, Africa. Africa, that in history was actually divided in 1884 here in Berlin at the Berlin-Congo conference by the then powers. And Africa since has been struggling and fighting for its dignity and its development. But I will limit myself to 4 major challenges when it comes to Africa. The first challenge is the challenge of peace, security, and stability. In addition to persistent conflict situations, terrorism has a tendency of becoming endemic on our continent, particularly in the region of the Sahel. And it has to be stated that for years now, Africa has been constantly warning that traditional peacekeeping operations in Africa, United Nations-led operations, are ill-suited to the fight against terrorism due to a lack of adequate mandates and resources. And the precipitous end of certain operations are a case in point in the face of anger and incomprehension on the part of the population. We have seen that here in Mali, and we've seen the same borne out in the Congo. And this is why we have always called for more robust mandates and better calibrated resources in order to combat terrorism within the framework of the African peace and security architecture. Obviously, and this goes without saying, with the logistical and financial support from the United Nations and our partner countries. This is the price, and only at this price we will be able to defeat terrorism on the African continent, or at least significantly reduce its scope of action. It is in our common interest, because the persistence of terrorism in Africa constitutes a global threat, which falls within the remit of the Security Council of the United Nations, which is the guarantor of our collective security system. And if you witness a situation, for example, in Mali and in the Sahel, many believe that it actually has stemmed and keeps flowing from the inadequate mandates and the inadequate assignment of resources to the Sahel region. The second challenge that I'd like to mention here is the economic development challenge. With its 30 million square kilometers, its demographic weight, 1.4 billion inhabitants, and in 2015 it's projected to rise to 2.1 billion in terms of population. And with its other resources, like mineral water, we see the great rivers in Africa, the Congo, Nile, the Zambezi River, energy, fuel, gas, and coal, its mineral resources and its land resources. 60% of the planet's undeveloped arable land are in Africa. Well, with all of this richness, Africa has the potential, the required potential, to sustain its development efforts and to contribute to global growth. Obviously, this certainly calls for enlightened public policies. But this really depends also on Africans themselves. But in addition to that, it also requires a fairer and more equitable world economic order. Dynamics of development are hampered, generally, when taxes are not paid at the point where wealth is created, where you come to a certain area, you extract resources, and then you transfer those resources and create value added somewhere else and create jobs somewhere else. And what do you leave where the resources come from? Well, empty holes and poverty. And this also has a link to migration flows. So, the reform of international tax systems is another problem that is important and on the top of our minds. So we've already said it. Dynamics of development are hampered by the taxes that are not paid where wealth is created, or due to abusive tax ascensions. So these are abusive, and they have been included in legislation and legislative frameworks in all of these countries and create a framework for the extraction and transfer of resources. And the other problem that we have in Africa is the rating agencies and their rating of African countries. It is based on methodologies that are increasingly contested. Why? Because in Africa, the perception of risk is often higher than the actual risk on the ground. I've said it time and again. African countries, despite the situations, repay their debt, even though the interest rates are extremely high, and despite all of that, they continue serving their debt. So this perception of risk and this rating creates a higher cost for credit because it creates an extra fee that is added, a risk premium that is added to the already high interest rates. And that is why Africa is strangling on debt, and that is why debt is accumulating and accruing in Africa. Therefore, in my view, it is time to refound international cooperation on newly founded paradigms as follows. First of all, reform of international tax systems. I've already talked about this before, but ever since it has been mentioned in the past, we haven't seen any progress. We should have an international tax on transactions of 4%, irrespective of the countries, in Europe or elsewhere. If we in Africa were able to had a 15% tax rate in order to tax all of those transfers, we would not even require any credits. We would have an equitable system, and we would be able to participate in the international trade system at the same level. And the other question is also the relaxation of OECD rules. I've actually mentioned that, and I also salute the developments that have been undertaken within the OECD, but the rules are very, very rigid when it comes to export credits. When you speak to the parties involved, they say, well, this is not up to us, but what we say, if the countries were able to have more extended credit lines, I speak about, for example, Senegal, where we had a credit for a hydroenergetic project. But we required financing actually of more than 10 years because a hydro dam, for example, has actually a service life of between 80 and 100 years. So you need more extended lines, 25, 50 years, for a project that will actually last 100 years. And this is something that we always have. It's a debate that we put on the table. That's what we also have in terms of debate that with China. They come, Chinese come and offer, for example, credit lines and credit periods of up to 25 years, and that's all we demand from China and from Europe. When it comes to infrastructure, the railroad lines, utilities, etc., big-ticket infrastructure projects require that kind of investment and that kind of framework, and it is also part of our dignity. So, as I said, in my opinion, Africa today needs fair rules and requires also equitable and fair partnerships. More than it needs, actually, official development aids, anyway, limited nowadays, and which is also flanked with inefficient mechanisms. Just for example, when it comes to infrastructure, I would also like to salute the participation of Germany in the African Development Bank, and I would hope that all of the African partners continue to support the African Development Bank, which is really doing a very remarkable job in terms of financing in Africa. So, the African Bank estimates that Africa's needs, annual needs, are situated between $130 and $170 billion a year. And this is certainly not with the official aid development that we will be able to develop such a vast territory with a very young and thriving population. And of course, the efforts and achievements of traditional partnerships have to be commended and recognized. And I certainly do not deny what has been done and what is positive as well. But all I do is that we have to move beyond that. The ground has been laid and by the partnership between Europe and Africa and at the international level. But at the same time, Africa will continue to open up to new partnerships. We will participate in globalization only if we do not renounce it. But it's not just that you open up for us. We cannot be exclusive in our partnerships. We need to see what is on offer and what is in our interest. So diversity is appreciated there, and we really need to reinvent multilateralism as an inclusive form of multilateralism for all. And it is vis-à-vis all of this that together we have gradually implemented the African Continental Free Trade Area, which will be one of the most important markets in the world, and which will help to establish a new doctrine of cooperation based on an ethic of shared values, of concerted solutions and mutually beneficial interests, while at the same time shunning ideological social-cultural conditionalities. This is what we have always insisted upon. Our way of being, we are Africans, and you need to accept us as we are. We're not Europeans, we're not Americans, we're not Chinese, we are Africans. And we need to be accepted as such, as Africans. And no political or cultural conditionality should be attached to our cooperation. The third challenge, quite quickly, will be the energy transition, a very important topic for Germany, the energy transition in the context of global warming. Following the well-established principle of shared but differentiated responsibility, Africa is fully committed to the fight against global warming. Everywhere on the continent, low-carbon, climate-resilient projects are springing up, pushed by the government, by the private sector. But the continent that pollutes the least cannot be forced to choose between development on the one hand and environmental protection on the other hand. That is, trying to be imposed upon us, or to go into debt or incur debt in order to finance the cost of the adaptation on its own. This is an absolutely vital question, because Africa has to carry its own, on its own, the financial burden of adaptation, or, on the other hand, forego development, because for the sake of global warming or climate warming, one has to forego fossil fuels of any kind, while only contributing a small fraction to global warming. And therefore, it's urgent to mobilize the financial resources needed for climate action, in particular within the framework of Partnership for a Just Energy Transition. Furthermore, in the interest of fairness and justice, we must avoid unilateral decisions, such as the one taken at COP26 in Glasgow, which banned foreign financing of fossil fuel projects. This was a decision taken unilaterally by industrialized countries. So, banning of foreign financing countries outside of signatory countries of fossil fuel projects. even when it comes to low-polluting ones, such as gas. So paradoxically, these countries import gas by actually turning it into LNG gas, while at the same time penalizing this. So while at the same time industrial countries continue to use far more polluting energies, such as coal. So this is really a crucial question when it comes to climate equity and justice. And I'd just like to remind you that the African Union, the African Development Bank, and the Global Adaptation Center launched the Accelerated Action for Adaptation in Africa program, the AAAP, in 2021. This ambitious initiative aims to mobilize up to $25 billion in order to strengthen Africa's climate resilience in key areas, such as, for example, agriculture, infrastructure, but also investing in youth and entrepreneurship, as well as finance and governance. And in my capacity as chairman of the supervisory board of the Global Adaptation Center, here standing in Berlin, I would like to launch an appeal to bilateral and multilateral partners to support that second phase of the AAAP initiative. So speaking of the period 2026 to 2030, because if Africa does not adapt to climate change, they will actually move in a similar direction by drawing on very polluting energies and therefore also contribute to the destruction of our planet. So, jointly we need to develop projects of development for Africa, but at the same time also trying to mitigate consumption of the fossil fuels in industrialized countries. So, both have to go hand in glove if we are really to effectively combat climate change. So I'd like to end with the fourth challenge, and that is the reform of global governance. The ideal underpinning multilateralism, and I'd like to remind you, is since the end of the World War, is to promote relations of trust. Relations of trust, solidarity, and inclusion between countries of unequal strength. And in keeping with this spirit, it is right to recognize the services that the United Nations and the organizations emerging from Bretton Woods systems have rendered to member states. But 80 years after its creation, post-war multilateralism is threatening to become obsolete because it no longer meets the realities and needs of our times. For more than 3/4 of the member countries, it is a source of inequality that fuels frustration, legitimate frustration, and even growing opposition to the system. The gradual expansion of the BRICS states into the global south, I believe that this is a symptom that has to be analyzed. And these symptoms must not be simply brushed aside. They have a root cause. Because if we ignore that and the illness fully takes hold, then it will be too late. So this gradual expansion of the BRICS into the global south happens because there is a malaise in the current system, a malaise that runs the risk of fragmentation if the system itself is not reformed. We should not want to come to that at all. A world with the competing multilateral points, and a world based on antagonism. And therefore, wisdom dictates that global political, economic, and financial governance should be overhauled to make it more representative of today's world's diversity. And I would also like to salute what the G20 have done. 2022, 2023, I was a member there representing the African Union, and the fact that the African Union was admitted as permanent member in the G20 was achieved back then, and that is a remarkable result. And this is an objective that is absolutely legitimate. Why? Because the African Union is the 8th largest economy in the world, if you look at it in its totality. So we have a total volume of almost $3 trillion. We have all of these economies tied in there, 20 economies. And this is really part of it. If you look at the population, we are 1.4 billion. Therefore, there's no reason why we should not be members of the G20. And it was a great success that in 2023, the African Union was accepted as a full member. We have a permanent seat in the G20. So we need to salute this, and I'd like to salute all of the G20 members who admitted the African Union as a permanent member. The granting of a third seat to Africa on the IMF board was also a right step in the right direction, particularly with regards to sub-Saharan Africa. So this is a right step in the reform of multilateral institutions. But it is important to turn to other bodies, such as the Security Council of the United Nations and the World Bank. It is important that they should follow the example of the G20 in order to bring about a more inclusive world, a world where we have a more legitimate, more effective and inclusive multilateralism. I would like to thank you on this note, ladies and gentlemen, and would like to congratulate you on the holding of the summit and for allowing me to address this message from Africa to you. Thank you very much.
Nous vous remercions à vous, Monsieur, Votre Excellence, pour votre perspective, pour les appels importants.
Your perspective and for these very important appeals that you, messages that you have brought today to us. Thank you very much.
So, there's a lot on my mind, actually. That was a very enlightening speech, and I will not try to summarize what we just heard, but I am sure you are taking your thoughts away. What I will do is I will now hand over to two very important young voices. Let me say one thing, because I noted it down. You've got the translation devices. You can either leave them on your chair when you leave this room, or you pass them back to my colleagues at the door. Don't take them home. They don't serve you well, and we need them again. So, over to two very important young voices that I want to introduce to you. One is Isabel Steidl, and she will be introduced by one we consider a colleague by now. Sorry, Contimi, but that's Contimi Kenfak Muafo. You're officially with the Uni Aachen, but we consider you one of us. Since you've joined the Young Global Changers program, you're now a Young Global Changers ambassador for Africa. And while we are super astonished by the amount of multitasking you're able to do, obviously, what's truly inspiring to us is that in everything you do, in your studies, in your work with us, in your many other functions, you always aim to also change the narrative around the globe. And I think you're very, very good at this, and let's see you do your magic, and you will introduce Isabel to us. Please both come to the stage, Isabel Steidl and Kuntimi Kenfak Muafo. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Claudia. But before we start, I would like to briefly introduce my friend, Isabel Steidl. She's a G70 and G20 youth representative for Germany for both 2023 and 2024. So, Isabel, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here, actually. And I'm taking a lot already from the first day, where we experienced some great conversations.
Yeah. Tell us more about yourself and about your work as a youth representative.
So I started back in the local municipal council in the city of Heilbronn. It's in the south of Germany. And there, when I advocated for climate policies, I understood that we have global challenges and local challenges. But in order to be truly powerful, we need to connect those. And this is why I'm very happy that we both can have the stage today and we can have this summit to talk about our perspectives, but to hear all these different perspectives from all over the world and to have such a interesting mix together in one place, I think this is truly special about
I think you were one of the youngest parliamentarians in the city of Heilbronn, is that correct?
Exactly.
Can you talk more about that? How did that come to be?
I think in the end, we as the young people, we need to have the voice. Because, of course, many times we're feeling like we lack the experience. But in the end, it's us who are most affected of the decisions we do today. So we should not make this a gap between, young people and people with more experience, but we should find intergenerational solutions together. And I think this is something that we all need to do, for example, here today, but also in our everyday life, to find more common ground with more diverse stakeholders. And this is also something I'm really happy that today and yesterday especially, there were a lot of capacity building with the young global changers. Would you like to tell us more about it, CONTINU?
Yes, I mean, we're talking about the summit, and I would just like to very briefly touch about my highlight for the first day of the summit yesterday, because we had a keynote speech from Dr. Ala Murabit, which to me was very inspiring. And I think one thing that I took off was the fact that young people, young organizations working on the ground, they're not asking for charity, but they're demanding partnership. I think that's very, very important, because partnership requires that the global leaders and these young leaders sit on the table, see each other as equals, and actually engage in that dialogue, right? And I think that that is something that I really resonated with me, and I hope that it did resonate with the young leaders that were listening as well. So do you have any highlights for the first summit?
I love that point, because it reminds me of one session I took part, and actually a woman who is also participating here today in the audience, she told us this powerful story of how she's having all these obstacles right now, funding issues, a lot of things where you could easily say, okay, I'm giving up. But instead, she found 20 other NGOs in her space where they're all doing different work but related to each other. And they understood that they have 5 narratives they all agree on. And now she's here today bringing these narratives to the Global Solution Summit, and her colleagues from the other 20 organizations are bringing this to other summits. And I think this is a powerful message for all of us, how even in these times that are very challenging, we need to foster collaboration even more than ever.
Yeah, the key word here is collaboration, really, because that happens when there is dialogue. And I am a young global changer. I took part in the program 3 years ago, and I've been engaging with the community up to this point. And, of course, my heart really beats for that community. Of course, yesterday we had the Young Global Changers Recoupling Awards, and it was really fascinating, as it is every year, in my opinion. But I think in the first day of the summit, there was much more than that, which I find was quite important, right? We had the